Another thing to keep your eye on, the world's biggest mobile phone company, Vodafone, out with its results earlier this morning. We partner now with the FT to bring you Lex on Bloomberg. You get a sneak peek of the Financial Times' flagship column a day early. We're joined right now by Kevin Allison. He is live from London. So, Kevin, how is Vodafone doing in emerging markets, I should say, like India and China?
India is a very interesting market for Vodafone, Deirdre. Vodafone's first half sales in India were up just a hair over 20%, which isn't bad, except when you consider that the number of people in India who have mobile phones increased by just over half in the same period. This says that the Indian market, even though it's one of the hottest growth markets for mobile phones, it remains highly competitive. You have 12 different mobile providers competing to offer mobile services, which is keeping prices down, in fact, driving down the average revenue per user for mobile operators. So even though India is a good growth market for some of these phone companies, and a lot of investors are very excited about the potential of a market where only 40% of the country's billion or so people have a mobile phone, it's not exactly easy going.
So, Kevin, India, China, what about the U.S.? I mean, Vodafone has a huge stake in Verizon Wireless. How is this panning out for them?
Vodafone's situation in the U.S. is also very interesting. They own 45% of Verizon Wireless, which is one of the U.S.'s biggest mobile phone companies. It produces prodigious cash flows. The problem is that the 55% owner of Verizon Wireless, which is Verizon Communications, decided to stop paying dividends out of that business about 4 years ago. So for the past 4 years, except for the occasional tax-related payment, Vodafone has not been able to unlock any of the value tied up in that Verizon Wireless joint venture. That may be changing soon because Verizon Communications relies on debt payments from Verizon Wireless to fund its own dividend. That debt is shrinking fast, and eventually, in order to support its own dividend, Verizon Communications may have to turn the taps back on at Verizon Wireless, which on the most recent payout rate of about 70% would have resulted in a dividend of about $10 billion split between both Verizon Communications and Vodafone, 55% to 45% this year.
So, Kevin, going big picture, we know that Vodafone is cutting some costs. I mean, you in your column are going to be alluding to something, saying Vodafone is pretty much the example of how to run a maturing business. What do you mean by that?
That's right. Well, mobile telecom companies like to paint themselves as dynamic, high-tech businesses, but the fact is they're mature businesses. They have to move from a stance of focusing on growth, which was Vodafone's strategy for many of the past few years, to one of focusing on shareholder returns by cutting costs and by boosting free cash flow. Vittorio Coelho, who's the chief executive of Vodafone, last year announced £1 billion of cost cuts over the next 2 years. He's a year ahead of that and announced $1 billion more today. So Vodafone is ahead of the curve on cost cutting and managing a mature business.
Kevin, thanks so much. Kevin Allison joining us there from London from the FT.